Hey guys, and welcome to City Skylines Europe in Detail. I hope you guys are doing well, and hopefully you guys enjoyed that little intro as well. It took a fair while to get those shots, but I really love those. I was trying to show off the town from a closer or more intimate perspective. If you had a really keen eye, you may have also noticed the area that we build and detail in this episode. And I have to say right from the start that this is easily the most detailing I've done in an episode so far. And I guess it's nothing in particular, we are just expanding Borgovino even further up this valley, and as the buildings thin out, our detailing gets more heavier. This is mainly because there's a lot of space that opens up between these buildings when we place less of them down. So no mucking around, we are straight into it in this episode, and I'm using the paths again here to map out where I'm going to put these buildings. And this is really creating the first of those open spaces we just spoke about. I've made the path go across the road here, and I'm going to make this wider with some props, and we're going to create a bit of a raised plaza above this roadway. So the first thing I need to do here is the practical stuff, like creating a tunnel here for our little wee stream, and also a tunnel for some of the traffic to move through. Admittedly, there's not much traffic on this road, which is by design, and the rest of the area is very much left as an open plaza. And I put a pretty cool looking like old school compass decal thing down in the middle of the plaza, which is following a real life plaza from Manarola, which is the place I'm taking my inspiration from. And I finished the area off with one of Skibbeth's really cool stone decals and a few fences and little trees. Now let's move up the road and detail as we go. And I've had a comment recently from Chris, who's a big fan of the series, asking if we can make some of the buildings look a bit older, and unfortunately I couldn't do it as we discussed, but I've made a point to bring these ivies back a bit more. And this building here seemed appropriate with these columns out front. I've made it look like they're creeping up those. And I've also tucked a cube service in here, an entertainment cube service, so we see lots of foot traffic around this area. I slide a couple of different shop fronts in here and put some cracked decals down, and this really cool like bushy archway. From the videos I've seen of Manarola, it's really awkward to get a vehicle through the town, so I'm trying to replicate that here. I finished the area off with a couple of markets and some lights on the stream side of the road, and this road already has a really cool and intimate little vibe. So it was about at this point here that I started having real trouble with some of the buildings on the higher levels of the town. Even though I had used the building spawn point mod, I was still having a lot of buildings being abandoned, especially like I said on those higher levels of the city. So I've decided to run this road here that allows access to some of those buildings. This wasn't really in the original plan, but yeah, I'm going to make the most of it. I'm going to try and make this look pretty unique and a little bit different in a couple of different ways. There's a couple of different places along the road where it enters into various tunnels, and a couple of them look like they're sort of going into buildings or diving beneath them. And this is purely just to make it interesting, and I also don't want to show too much of the road, just enough so that you know there's a road there without it sort of dominating. So there's one part in particular of the road here that's quite exposed and visible, and I want to do something a little bit different with this, so I try a variety of different roads, but I end up settling for Revo's sort of nice stone archway. I'm sorry, the name of it slipped me, but I've used it before. I used it around Gotsberg beach, and it just looks so right in Borgovino here. So once I'd decided on that, I was sort of umming and ahhing about whether to put buildings around here or do something a little bit different, and you know me, I chose to do something a little bit different, and I'm putting a big exposed cliff in following the contour of this road. This part of the town is going to be right bang in the backdrop for a lot of the shots that I make, and I really want to introduce a bit of rawness to offset all the buildings. And what better way to do that than a hulking big cliff right in the middle of town. So there's a trail in the Cinque Terre that links all of the 5 villages together, and it's called the Blue Trail, and I definitely want to represent that in one way or another in this little town. In fact, we started last episode with the hotel when we put a little wee section of it in there, and here we are going to put even more of it in, and there's sections of it that are tunnels, obviously, that follow closely next to the railway. Some of them even run through the same tunnel as the railway. But here we're going to begin to build the trail back towards Gotsberg. And this starts with a big tunnel that has to go through and then out and wind down the side of a cliff to get around there, which is very, very interesting and makes for some quite difficult building. So the first thing I needed was rendered pedestrian tunnels, and Kloos was my man for that. He does a really good job on all the roads and the network stuff. And then it was about getting this tunnel at a acceptable gradient and making sure it's sort of lined up in the right direction, which was easier said than done, because eventually I want to have videos that actually go through the tunnel, so I need it at a realistic gradient. So once the tunnel part of the walkway was pretty right, I could move on to winding it down the side of this cliff here. So the idea here is to tuck the path in as close as I can get it to the cliff, and then use the node controller to squeeze the path down so it's a little bit narrower. And again, I'm trying to keep all those gradients acceptable and realistic, because there's going to be a lot of people use this path. I mean, as soon as I plumbed this up to Gotsberg, there were people pouring up this, and it's super visible on the outside of the cliff, so it's got to look right. And the last thing to do to cap off that look is on the outside of the path, I bring the cliff out to the edge of the path, so it looks like the path's sort of been carved into the side of the cliff. And this took a fair amount of work with PO, but it's totally worth it, and it sort of all just blends together in the end. So next I decided to put this like little wee lookout up here, and there's actually some really cool vanilla, admittedly they're DLC props for this wooden viewing platform, and they translate really well to PO as well. So I've PO'd this one here and sort of stuck it out a little bit on this point here, and this has got a really awesome view back to Gotsberg. So I also add some information signs to the area and a few benches around for anyone that needs a rest. And then just finish the area off with a whole lot of trees to add a little bit of shade to the area. Now I can extend this line right through to Gotsberg, and that part of the path coming down the cliff there was by far the most involved part of this little walkway, at least this section so far anyway, because I do plan on making this trail run a fair distance along the water frontage, and eventually it may even link every little town that we build on this map and in this series.
So you can see here the path has now reached the height of the road, so I'm pretty much just going to run it down and next to the road all the way into Gotsberg from here. And once it's all plumbed up from Gotsberg through to Borgovino, we get lots of people walking along it like I mentioned earlier, so most of the citizens are either taking the train or they're walking, which is great. It would be nice to see the pedestrian paths have some kind of bonus feature where the citizens will walk where the scenery's really nice or something like that, because this would be a beautiful walk here along the coast and would probably be worth walking even with no destination in mind. So at this point we have officially got the blue trail in from Gotsberg to Borgovino, and the time has come to detail around where this tunnel exits out into Borgovino. So this tunnel entrance in real life looks a little bit like this. It's got this sort of picture around the top that shows the scenery you may see on the way, and it's all lit up and looks very inviting. So I'm going to try my best to stick somewhat to this blueprint. And the other idea I want to incorporate here is I want it to empty out into a very small plaza, or maybe it's an old town square. So I also have a road coming right through here, the one we put in earlier, which is a little bit of an inconvenience. I didn't think about it crossing right through where the tunnel's going to be, but nevertheless I've changed some of these building spawn points to down to a lower road, and I still want to get a little bit of traffic up here. I've changed some of the vehicles, the service vehicles in the town, to be little scooters and bicycles. So hence why I'm making these little tunnels here, so when those bikes come up it doesn't look like they're just going straight into the side of the building. It looks like they're carrying on through these tunnels. It's definitely been a challenge trying to create this town to look a certain way as well as having the game run correctly. I do get a lot of clipping in the town, for instance, but when you consider that the original game was made for a road to be 8 meters wide, and I'm trying to make alleyways, sometimes 2 meters wide, yeah, there's always going to be issues there, especially towards clipping. So I've just learnt to live with that, because this little town looks nothing like it does now when I make those alleyways wider. So would I sacrifice the whole look of the town for the odd garbage truck driving through a cafe? Well, you guys can be the judge on that one. So anyway, to finish off this area, I put a little wee cafe out just to the left side of the tunnel, and then with the tunnel I try and make it look like the photo from Manarola that we seen earlier, but I also add a couple of electronic timetables that show if the tunnel's open or closed at any given time. I also put a couple of Sven Berlin's really cool rotating ball props, and just a couple of little fences and gardens here and there. I wanted to put some buildings up the top of the cliff, just a handful here and there, because I thought this would be quite a unique place to have some buildings, and it would be a great view back over the town. So I curl a little plain looking road up here with a pedestrian path right next to it, and we do the trick that I used in an earlier episode, and we place the buildings here directly over the road so that we don't see the road at all or any of the service vehicles that may come up here. I do like the idea of seeing some of the traffic in the city on the higher portions, or rather in the higher elevations of the town, but just not heaps of it. We want to see more pedestrians than any vehicles. So the parts of these roads that you will see will just have little prop tunnels either side, so it looks like it's just diving back into a tunnel, much like we did earlier. Admittedly, you don't see me doing that right now, but I come back later on and place those prop tunnels in. So as the town sort of becomes a bit more scarce as we move out away from it here, I want the buildings to thin out in numbers somewhat, and rather than just placing them here and there, I've decided to put a cliff in this particular bit here, so it looks like these have been built as close up to either side of this cliff as we can, and it sort of naturally thins out the number of buildings. I've also tried to make it look like a part of this road or this pedestrian pathway has been carved along the side of the cliff to reach the last little cluster of houses out here on this point. So I used the same cliff props that we've used elsewhere in the town. Obviously we want all of these cliffs to look like they're the same material, and I gotta say I really like the look of it. I like the way the cliff sort of looks like it swells down the hill a little bit, and the way that the pathways and roadways are cutting through this rugged cliff area, and it's sort of all topped off with these houses jammed in every little space we can sort of possibly get them. So we carry on our technique of jamming these buildings in everywhere we can here, but we place these ones here in a little bit more randomly on this really niche piece of unique land. I really think that imperfection is perfection, and I don't want all of these buildings to just line up perfectly. I want some of them to look like they shouldn't be sort of put like that, but they belong there, if that makes any sense. And this horrible piece of land here offered me the perfect opportunity to do something different. So these buildings placed in here are all being turned into procedural objects so that I can work with them a little bit more closely, and I pretty much just scatter them randomly across the cliffside, but they all have these concrete decks that I'm going to dress up in one way or another. And I'm trying to make it look like the access point for these buildings is behind them on the road. So I'll put a prop door around there eventually, so it looks like the citizens can come in there and down onto these deck areas out the front here. Obviously that's not going to happen in game because this is all procedural objects. I couldn't do it any other way. But I still make a point to make it look as realistic as I can, and that includes, you know, access if these were real buildings. So once I get all of those buildings in place and I've got the decks sort of mapped out with my concrete block, I can come and detail them a little bit more closely. Now rather than putting a whole lot of individual props on these decks, I'm just using Seabud's awesome sort of prop decks that he's got on the Steam Workshop, and I place those as well and as carefully as I can on the little concrete decks I'd already made, and then chuck some different stone retaining walls around the blocks. Placing these little prop decks down saves me putting all the individual props down, so you could imagine the time saved there. So I recommend going and checking these out on Seabud's Steam Workshop, guys, and he's also got a whole lot of other really cool stuff too. So the only other thing I do on these decks is place a few lights around that you'll see in the cinematics towards the end. So the last little bit I've got to do here to finish this part of the town is put another retaining wall down here, and again I want to do something really unique with this and make it look different from anything else I've done in Borgovino. So it's Revo's beautiful retaining wall used here again, but I'm using the open version this time with open arches, and I want to sort of make it look like this has been constructed directly into the cliffside here. This leaves me with a really awkward piece of land up the top to do something with, so I just pretty much turn it into a little garden area. You know how it is, if in doubt, bush it out. And I found a really cool olive tree on the Steam Workshop, so I turned this into like a little olive garden eventually. And once that's complete, I can finish putting Vecchio Cristo's awesome rock props underneath Revo's bridge, and it really looks awesome. I love the way this bridge looks with the cliffs under it. So just quickly on another note, guys, I have been contemplating getting a guest builder into this series. Maybe just a one episode thing, but I'd love to know your thoughts on who you guys would recommend, because I know who I would ask, but I'd love to know who you guys would like to see potentially come and do a guest build. I am pouring some serious love into this series. It's just so enjoyable coming in and working on this little town. It really is my happy place. We added some really unique areas to the town today, and I hope you guys have enjoyed that episode. In the next episode we do a little bit of everything. There's a bit of custom building, there's a bit of road building, and there's a little bit of detailing. Hopefully you guys will join me for that episode, and as usual, look after yourselves guys, spread the love, and I will see you hopefully on the next episode of Europe in Detail. See ya!